Welcome to this video on the top 10 werewolves of the Silent Striders from the tabletop role-playing game Werewolf the Apocalypse. As the warriors of Gaia, it is not unusual for the Garou to lose the occasional battle, but the Silent Striders lost a war in antiquity and paid the price by not only being deprived of their homeland, but being cut off from the wisdom of their ancestors. Silent Striders never stay in the same place long. They are always traveling, always searching for their ancestors in the dark Umbra, and the secrets that will break the curse of Set, and finally allow them to return home again. But without further ado, the top 10 werewolves of the Silent Striders. Number 10. Horus. One of the greatest leaders of the Silent Striders was the one who led them in peace, then in war, and finally into exile. Horus was a Silent Strider when Egypt was Kem, and forged pacts with the Mokole and the Bastet. When Set, the exiled prince turned vampire, returned to Kem to usurp Osiris, Horus allied with Osiris' sister wife, Isis the Magician, and later with her immortal son, Horus the Avenger. Set's brood grew from one to many, and Horus met the antediluvian in battle, and even managed to wound him. The Silent Strider's lore states that the tribe's mystics bound Set and forced him into torpor beneath the earth. Yet before Set fell, he unleashed a powerful curse against the Silent Striders, against their very spiritual name, cutting them off from the spirits of their ancestors and the gnosis of the land of Egypt. The language of the curse is as follows. By the names I have spoken, lupines, I curse you. I place my mark upon you, that you shall forever be severed from thy dead fathers and mothers. I damn you with my touch, that never again shall you rest in the lands of thy people. May the names of your ancestors be forgotten, and may their ghosts fade from hunger in the Duat. As I was cast out, so then shall you be, exiled, voiceless, and lost forevermore. But Horus led his people out of Egypt, and taught them to survive as travelers and wanderers, which is how the Silent Striders have lived ever since for generations. Number 9. Wepauwet. Born in the days of ancient Kem, Wepauwet was one of the greatest warriors of the tribe before their exile from their homeland. He was blood brother and advisor to Horus, and diplomat to the immortal warrior king, Horus the Avenger, leader of the Shem's-Heru. Wepauwet's loyalty to Horus was exceeded only by love of his people and his land, as well as his hatred for the servant of Apep, the dark god, Set. After Set's curse drove the Silent Striders from Egypt and cut them off from their ancestors, Wepauwet recognized the danger of the Silent Striders losing part of themselves by being denied access to the wisdom and lore of their forebears. Even if the Theurgers could break the curse, it would take time, and in that time who knew what might be lost. So, Wepauwet planned to go to Horus, avenger of his father, and ask him to join the ranks of his immortals. When Horus learned of Wepauwet's plan, he urged him not to do it. He could not know the consequences of such an act, as their souls belonged to Gaia. But Wepauwet said he would risk it, for the good of their people, and he returned to Kem, where he petitioned the immortal Horus for entry into the ranks of the Shem's-Heru. In exchange for the spell of life, Wepauwet pledged to act as the Avenger's sword against the cult of Set, for so long as he walked the earth. Horus agreed to this bargain, and commanded his priests to perform the spell of life on Wepauwet. Wepauwet hoped to use the cycles of death and rebirth to serve as a living record for the history and lore of the Silent Striders. Yet this could not be, for the spell of life was intended to be used on mortal souls, not the beings of half-flesh and half-spirit that are the Garou. When Wepauwet died the first time, the tribe's totem, Owl, came to him and told him that he would only be able to escape death this once, and that should he die again, he would be forever barred from the tribal homeland, and left doomed to wander the Umbra as a tormented spirit. Wepauwet despaired at this, not for his own sake, but that Set's curse would win, and the tribe would suffer for it. Owl recognized Wepauwet's willingness to sacrifice himself and proposed a compromise. Owl would carry him to the tribal homeland, where he would dwell for the rest of eternity. There, he would be the link between the ancestors hidden to the Silent Striders by Set's curse, and unbound by the pledge he made to Horus the Avenger. So it was, for over 2,000 years, Wepauwet has waited in the Silent Striders' tribal homeland, in the ruins of ancient Khem, for those wanderers with the wits and courage to locate the Umbral Realm. Wepauwet serves as the intermediary between those rare living Silent Striders who managed to reach the homeland and their ancestors, blinded and deafened to their living relatives' attempts to reach them. For his part, Wepauwet has not stopped trying to circumvent or break Set's curse on the tribe. In the late 1970s, Wepauwet began experimenting using rites lost to the Silent Striders since ancient Khem, to forge a connection between the sacred name of his blood brother, Shu Horus, and a newborn Silent Strider. The use of this rite nearly destroyed Wepauwet's spirit, but he succeeded. He would repeat the rite several more times. In the 1990s, his experiment finally bore fruit, when a young Silent Strider, during her rite of passage, channeled the great power of Shu Horus to wipe out a force of Setites during her rite of passage. Several of the other children, now adults, repeated the feat, calling upon the ancestors who Wepauwet had linked their spirits with. Wepauwet smiles at these events, even in the final days, for he may yet see the rebirth of his tribe. Number 8. Black Shuck. For some, Black Shuck is a herald of death. For others, he is a companion to the lost and the wayward. Tales of the ghost dog of East Anglia, Norfolk, Essex, and Suffolk date back centuries, haunting the cemeteries, roads, glens, and marshes. The superstitious claim that to lay eyes on Black Shuck dooms the seer to die within 1 year. That is, if old Shuck doesn't take their soul right then and there. But the truth is, Black Shuck is not a spectral hound, but a bloodline of Silent Striders descended from an Egyptian Guru named Ahmad ibn Fadlan, who traveled to England with the Fenrir warrior Bullywolf Bearslayer to battle a powerful vampire and its brood. Bullywolf died in battle as befits a warrior of the Get, but Ahmad stayed and bred with the local wolves of Norfolk. Now, every few generations, the Silent Strider genes emerge in the small, protected population of Garu's English wolf kinfolk, and the legend of Black Shuck again walks the countryside. But Black Shuck's arrival is always a portent of trying times, whether it be plague, monsters, or turmoil among humans. In every one of these events, Black Shuck has played a critical role in the Garu's fight against its enemies. And now, as the Black Spiral Dancers re-emerge from their hidden hives in Scotland, it is believed that Black Shuck may return soon, for the last time, to herald the beginning of the apocalypse. Number 7. Buries-the-Dead. Born in Cairo, Egypt in 1963, Buries-the-Dead underwent the first change while being attacked by 3 fledgling vampires, all of whom died beneath her killing frenzy. Several mortal police officers also died, but they were minions of the Setites. The Silent Striders found the young woman and smuggled her out of Egypt to America. There she gained experience stalking and killing vampires across the country in New York, Detroit, and Miami. Finally, she returned to Africa. Though she suffers from the same curse as the rest of her tribe, barring her from tarrying too long in Egypt, she has made the killing of vampires, particularly followers of Set, her top priority. The serpents have deployed their typical array of tricks and skullduggery, from offers of bribes to magic to slaying kinfolk and packmates, but Buries-the-Dead simply leaves more and more piles of vampire ashes in her wake. With the fall of Blacktooth as king of Africa's Simba, Walks with Might has diverted his attention to the affairs of the Ahadi and suppressing the worm creatures once controlled by Blacktooth. However, he gives Buries-the-Dead as much support as he can in her crusade to purge the homeland of every single vampire she can. For her part, Buries-the-Dead knows that her fate is to die beneath a vampire's fangs. Every day before that fate arrives, she will use to kill leeches. Number 6. Abnatha, the Laughing One. If you ever want to provoke even the calmest silent strider to anger, mention the name of Abnatha, the Laughing One. Abnatha was once the most promising theurge in the tribe, but now he is one step away from falling to the worm. In his youth, Abnatha was a sagacious and promising mystic, but he was seduced early on by the Eaters of the Dead, a secret society within the Silent Striders that utilizes a forbidden ritual, the Rite of Dormant Wisdom, to devour the brains of their victims and acquire their knowledge, occasionally while the victim is still alive. Big ouch. Abnatha became addicted to the use of the rite, not just for the knowledge gained from the dead, but eventually as a form of necrotic voyeurism. He would dig up the graves of Garou and humans, devour their brains, and then sift through their memories to partake in the lives of strangers. Later, he began eating the brains of worm spawn and black spiral dancers, and reveled in the forbidden knowledge that became as much a part of him as his own memories. But the creatures of the worm are clever, and the Rite of Dormant Wisdom left Abnatha open to physical and psychic attack. One bane of the Defiler worm took the form of Kuru disease, a rare neurodegenerative disease found among the people of Papua New Guinea, who practiced funerary cannibalism by cooking and eating their dead relatives. The disease would devour the brain over time, leading to what the people called Kuru, or trembling, as the victim lost muscular control, as well as fits of uncontrolled laughter with the degeneration of the brain. But Abnatha was Garou, not human, and even when reinforced by a Bane spirit, the Kuru disease did not kill him. However, it did have a very negative effect on his brain. His frenzies became more violent as he broke out in fits and convulsions of laughter at the most inappropriate of times, which is how he became known as the Laughing One. Under the Bane's influence, Abnatha understood that the memories of the dead were much more potent and rewarding when wrested from the brains of a victim who was still alive. Think something along the lines of Hannibal Lecter eating Paul Krendler's brain in the sequel to Silence of the Lambs. Like any eater of the dead, when Abnatha was discovered, he was cast out of the tribe. In the final days, Abnatha the Laughing One wanders the realms with a pack of rabid hyenas, massacring human villages and settlements. His hyenas crack the bones and lick the insides clean of marrow, while Abnatha feasts on the contents of their skulls. Sept warders who know of him have him marked for the death hunt. On the other hand, many of the targets of Abnatha's gruesome feasts were Pentek's employees. Several times, Abnatha has come to the defense of the Silent Striders, and his morbid practices even put dread in the hearts of the Black Spiral Dancers. Secret Eaters of the Dead in the tribe, along with hardline Red Talons and Get of Fenris, have prevented the great leaders of the Garou nation from hunting Abnatha down and killing him. But how long does the Laughing One truly have until he falls to the worm, or perhaps some other malign spiritual force? Number 5. Anubis Hillwalker. Anubis Hillwalker was born the illegitimate son of a preacher's daughter, who enjoyed a night of passion with a mysterious traveler, who was gone long before Anubis, named Joseph by his mother, came into the world. Joseph had a relatively happy childhood. His grandfather, the old preacher, doted on him, though he was less kind to the boy's mother, and frequently reminded her of her sinful dalliance. When Joseph was 5, his mother died in what was reported as a drowning accident. Joseph then went to live with his grandfather, and became his pupil. At the age of 10, Joseph preached his first sermon. At the age of 12, he had almost the entire Bible memorized, and was dreaming of following in his grandfather's footsteps as a preacher. Then he changed. Joseph, terrified of what was happening to him, begged his grandfather to perform an exorcism on him. The attempted exorcism only caused Joseph to change once again, and his grandfather, overcome by the delirium, was reduced to a babbling invalid. Joseph tried his best to care for him, supported by those members of the church who weren't completely terrified of the boy. Then one day, a stranger came knocking. The tall, dusky man introduced himself as Horus Farseer and told Joseph, quite casually, that he was Joseph's long-lost father. Then Horus did something to restore the grandfather's mind from the delirium and took Joseph away to the Silent Striders. Joseph changed his name completely to Anubis Hillwalker following his rite of passage. He still has bitter memories of his mother's death, which he believes was a suicide. The Silent Striders have done what they could to help him deal with the traumatic events of her death and his first change. For the most part, their efforts were successful. For his part, Anubis tries not to focus on the painful past, but on the shining future that he saw in a vision during his rite of passage, where all of Gaia's creatures lived together in harmony to protect her. Anubis Hillwalker travels throughout the southeast of Appalachia, including eastern Kentucky, eastern Tennessee, and western North Carolina, preaching in the hill towns, villages, and hollers what he calls the gospel. Anubis's gospel, his take on the Gaian religion, retains enough facets of Christianity that he can pass it off as a charismatic branch, despite having blended in elements of Garu and Cherokee spiritualism. So far, Anubis has managed to convert a number of mountain folk to what he calls the love of God in the land. During one of his tours of Kentucky, Anubis stumbled across changelings of the High Castle Crafters in the Cumberland Mountains and was permitted to visit their freehold. Since then, Anubis has kept his eyes open for more signs of the fairy folk and hopes to enlist them in the struggle to preserve Gaia against the worm. Number 4. Bennu. Bennu is barely an adult, but she carries a heavy burden, the entire past of the Silent Striders tribe, and quite possibly its future. Even her name is indicative of the role that she was born to play. In the ancient language of Egypt, Bennu means hope. It came as a surprise to the cynical elders of the tribe that a naive, wide-eyed young girl would distinguish herself in any way during her rite of passage, a sortie into a Setite temple. But in the midst of battle, Bennu began crying out in ancient Egyptian, a chant long lost to the tribe that sent the Setite high priestess screaming back into the shadows of the temple. Bennu and her right pack chased the serpents down into the depths of the temple and slew them all. Bennu, unknowingly, had channeled the spirit of Horus, the first Silent Strider to contact one of the ancestors since before the Silent Striders were forced out of Egypt. The Theurges were amazed as to how this pup was free of Set's curse. Yet, Bennu stood before them as one link to their long-lost past. Now, despite her youth and inexperience, Bennu holds high station in the tribe. Some of her fellow Striders would gladly see her fall from grace, despite the great gifts she bears and its importance to the tribe's future. Additionally, 2 Setite elders, Saracen and Gede, have learned what Bennu is and vowed to destroy her in the name of their grandsire and god. Bennu is surrounded by guards wherever she goes, fierce, battle-hardened Aruns, who would gladly give up their lives and even their souls to protect her and the promise she holds, Egypt at last restored to the Silent Striders and an end to their millennia of wandering. Number 3. Vic Stryker. In the 1920s and 30s, there was only one Garu whose name was synonymous with action and red-blooded, two-fisted, all-American adventure, the Silent Strider, Vic Stryker. If you name the place, Vic Stryker has probably been there at some point, in search of treasure, excitement, romance, or Gaia's justice. He battled Setites in the Middle East, Triad from Mori in China, the Ku Klux Klan in America, Nazi Fenrir in Amsterdam, and is even rumored to have had a few dalliances under the lights of Paris. One with the famous German-American actress Marlene Dietrich, and another with the La Sombra anti-tribu Lucita de Aragon. In his day, Vic's adventures to seek out the lost cairn of Skull Island and the umbral realm of the Hollow Earth made him a legend in his tribe. Him and his motley band of companions, the Eagle's Nest Pack, made up of Lorna McNabb, a Fianna Philodox with a quick temper, a quicker tongue, and fists like hammers, Dr. Stratus, an Australian glasswalker theurge and man of science, Greta Cole, a Shadow Lord Ragabash, an heiress of a wealthy line of European nobility, as well as femme fatale, and rounding out the bunch was An Lei Sheng, a stargazer Arun and master martial artist. Stryker also traveled with even stranger companions in his time, including the Russian son of ether and scientific genius, Professor Emil Zoltan, and the wandering Indian changeling Eshu, Visada. On one of his adventures in search of the Malachite scarab, Stryker met, fell in love with, and eventually married a feisty Fianna kinfolk named Samantha Westcott, a knockout, both in terms of looks and her left hook, if you made the mistake of calling her a dame. Vic only made the mistake that one time. In the 1940s, Vic Stryker's luck seemed to run out, along with the luck of everyone around him. Vic lost part of his leg and his right eye to Nazi shrapnel from a bomb. Greta Cole and An Lei Sheng died in the war. Lorna went back home to defend her sept against the Blitz. Dr. Stratus left everything behind and wandered into the Umbra. Professor Zoltan returned to Ukraine to defend the homeland against invasion and was taken alive by the Sabbat. Rumor has it he died under the tender ministrations of the Sabbat's chief torturer, Sasha Vikos. Visada returned to his native India and was so embittered by the suffering of his people that he was undone, his Fae's soul forever lost. Finally, Vic's wife, Samantha, took ill with polio and died soon after the end of the war. But even without an eye, or the full use of one of his legs, Vic Stryker got back into the adventure business, until he was called upon by Congress to answer for his activities and some of his supposedly questionable associations, particularly the Russian Professor Zoltan. Vic was unwilling to break the veil or betray a friend, so Stryker was charged with conspiracy and spent a year in federal prison. Betrayal by his country did what countless villains in Wormspawn couldn't do. Vic Stryker emerged from prison a broken man. He fled to Tangiers and lost himself in memories and heroin. During one particularly bad smack binge, he saw a jackal-headed ghost leave his body. In that moment, he had fallen to Harano, and his wolf was lost to him. Near the end of the 1970s, Vic Stryker took a boat back to New York City. Unable to face his former Gauru companions, he lived on the streets as a derelict, surviving on the charity of Mother Larissa's bone gnawers, who still remembered him from his glory days. He might have died as another nameless bum on the streets until one Friday night he came upon a junkie, high on PCP, mugging a terrified nun with a Saturday night special. Vic had no gifts, no war form, no delirium to protect him. But Vic Stryker would be Gaia damned if he was going to let this mug get away with robbing a nun right in front of him. Vic lunged at the mugger and laid him out with a right cross, the same one that had ended the career of many villains nearly half a century before. His ears weren't as good as they had been, but in that moment Vic could have sworn he heard a howl in the distance as he stood over the unconscious mugger. After cleaning himself up, Vic spent his 8th decade of life as a private investigator, operating out of a small office near the Central Park cairn. The wolf didn't return to him, but between his wits and his still tough fists, he was more than a match for the dregs of humanity that he was called on to deal with, the ones that are more often the source of misery than any labyrinthine plots of the worm. Finally, in his 90s, Vic Stryker retired to the town of Pleasantport, Maine. It was during this working retirement that Vic experienced a renewal of fame, as several young silent striders from around the world sought him out as a mentor. For Vic, mentoring the young wolves was part of his final quest, to reclaim the wolf that he had lost so long ago. In 2002, at the age of 100, Vic Stryker succeeded. Word traveled through the tribe that the Setites had established a temple in the town of Portland, Maine. Most of the Garus scoffed that this old man with his revolver and sword cane could make any difference. But as Vic laid out the plan to attack the temple with few to no casualties for the Garu side, they listened eagerly. In the heat of battle against the vampires, Vic felt the spark that he had lost nearly 40 years before. Rage boiled in him once again, and he was able to change into the Krynos form and fight the cult. But it was to be his last battle. Vic Stryker fell to 3 Setite warriors. But heroes don't really die. Vic Stryker would live on in the memories of those he inspired and the deeds of those he mentored. Even for a silent strider, Vic had one hell of a ride. Number 2. Mephi Faster-than-Death. Mephi's first brush with death was in his hometown of Leviton, New Jersey. His neighbor, an old man who had faded numbers tattooed on his forearm, told him of how the dead resent those who live and exist in pain and grief until the survivors finally join them in their dark kingdom. Everyone else pitied the old man, but thought he was crazy, his mind half broken by the inhumanity he had seen decades before. But Mephi knew that the old man wasn't crazy, because he could see the ghosts all around the old man, weeping, whispering, and wailing. The wraiths were powerless to do anything except push their suffering onto the living. When the old man finally died, the restless dead turned their attention to Mephi. Awareness of the dead is a two-way street. If you can see them, they know you can, and will hound you to act on their behalf. So at the age of 14, Mephi ran away from home, and hasn't stopped running since. Following his first change, Mephi, given the deed name Faster-than-Death, gained a reputation as one of the greatest messengers, lore seekers, and explorers of the Dark Umbra. Mephi has journeyed to cairns around the world and negotiated with pack alphas and sept leaders. His deed name, Faster-than-Death, has 2 meanings. First, Mephi has avoided dying in battle several times and has outrun trouble more than once. To the silent striders, his name is a mark of the terrible burden Mephi carries. He is not only haunted, as all silent striders are, but he is cursed, touched by the Dark Umbra since before he was born, a medium. Even those spirits who do not haunt him eventually notice him and begin begging or even demanding his help. So Mephi runs, and keeps running, always trying to be faster than death. There are other silent striders who, within the tribe, are more powerful or famous, or even of higher rank, like Buries-the-Dead and Walks with Might. But Mephi Faster-than-Death, much to his annoyance, has become something of an unofficial spokesman for his people. Walks with Might concerns himself with little outside of Africa, and Buries-the-Dead is obsessed with killing vampires to the exclusion of all else. Mephi, whose 2 main concerns are investigating the Dark Umbra and keeping the scattered cairns of the Garu in contact with one another, is more available than either one. In the final days, Mephi Faster-than-Death's attention was diverted to the Dark Umbra once more, in the aftermath of the 6th Great Maelstrom, and the flood of dead things, and even stranger creatures, that emerged in the material world as a result of the massive spirit storm. Number 1. Walks with Might. Walks with Might was born in the late 1970s to a pack of Ethiopian wolves. Through battles across northern Africa, the Lupus Arun established himself as one of the greatest living warriors in the Garu nation. All the while, Walks with Might understands that Africa does not belong to the Garu, and treads carefully with respect to the African Pharaoh, and one in particular, the mighty Simba king, Blacktooth. Blacktooth and his pride, the Endless Storm, ruled Africa with an iron fist, dominating the Pharaoh and destroying all who resisted them, whether they were of Gaia or the Worm. For years, Walks with Might was content to let Blacktooth reign unopposed. Not only did the Simba keep the creatures of the Worm in check, his efforts freed Walks with Might to focus his attention against the followers of Set in Egypt. But Blacktooth's brutality had claimed the lives of many pharaohs until they could no longer tolerate his rule. The Ahadi, an alliance of the Ajaba werehyenas, the Bagheera werecheetahs, the Kuche Kundu, a camp of Red Talon's Garu, the Mokole werecrocodiles, and even the Simba of the Kalahari Desert, formed to fight the Dark King of Africa, his sorcery, and his vampire allies. When Walks with Might learned of the Civil War and of Blacktooth's dealings with the vampires, he was infuriated, yet he was reluctant to intervene. Blacktooth may have been a tyrant, but the things Blacktooth held in check were far worse than the Simba King was. The African pharaoh also remembered the War of Rage keenly. If the Silent Striders seemed too eager to spill the blood of other Gaians, the Civil War might quickly change from Ahadi against Blacktooth to Pharaoh against Silent Striders. Walks with Might struck a balance. He sheltered the Ahadi and taught them pack tactics and other arts of war to counter the unity and coordination of the Lions of the Endless Storm. Before long, Walks with Might was pulled into the war as Blacktooth came to the defense of his vampire allies. The Ethiopian Garu paid a heavy price in blood, but in the end, Blacktooth was slain and his spirit annihilated. Following the Simba King's death, the leader of Africa's Bagheera, Kiva, proposed that the Ahadi become more than a temporary military alliance. Though there is some tension in the Ahadi, especially between Walks with Might and Hakimu, leader of the Maiyo of the Kalahari and new king of the Simba, the alliance was made permanent. As part of the pact, Walks with Might will demand, without hesitation, that the pharaoh aid in fighting the vampires of Africa. But he also does not hesitate in coming to the aid of Pharaoh when called upon, and enforces compliance from the other Silent Striders in Africa with an iron fist. And those were the top 10 werewolves of the Silent Striders. I kind of like the Silent Striders because they tie in well with other game lines and stories. The Silent Striders hate vampires and the followers of Set above all others, so they can be antagonists or allies, even to vampires depending on the situation. They're constantly on the hunt for esoteric or lost information, the type of which that could only be found in the hands of a mage or an ancient wraith in the underworld. And they still have the alliance with the Undying, which could be an excuse for a mummy to pop up in a chronicle featuring a Silent Strider. Basically, the Silent Striders give you a lot of options to play with when you are of a mind to cross streams between game lines. But where the Silent Striders are vagabonds and foretellers of doom, the next tribe is composed of the nobility, the kings and queens of the Garu nation, as they have been since the end of the Impergium, though some of them are losing their grip on both power and sanity. Coming up next, the top 10 werewolves of the Silver Fangs. Until next time.